Welcome everyone. In this first presentation on decision support tools for climate resilient agriculture, I'm going to talk about weather-driven models of plant and pest development. We'll look at why they're needed, how they work in general, and finally take a closer look at two models commonly used today, degree days and winter chill. So if you ever worked on a farm or even tended a backyard garden, you know that growing food essentially involves a series of events. Ground preparation, planting, applying nutrients and water, managing unwelcome pests and weeds, pruning and thinning and harvesting. These are just some of the events that need to take place in a certain order and within certain windows of opportunity. And missing these windows of opportunity can be costly in terms of both the quantity and quality of your harvest. One of the biggest wild cards in managing a crop is the weather. Farmers have known for millennia that in cooler years, plants tend to start later and grow slower than in warmer years. The same is generally true for bugs. This is not a surprise, as both plants and insects are ectothermic or cold-blooded. Their metabolism and hence rate of growth is strongly influenced by the ambient temperature. Fortunately, researchers have been working on this for a long time and have developed models that do a really good job at predicting how quickly crops and insects will develop based on weather. Of course, other requirements like nutrition and space need to be met, but these can often be managed through farming practices. Temperature and sunlight, on the other hand, in general cannot be managed, but these models at least provide information when different practices are going to be needed, such as irrigation or pest management. An example of a weather-driven model are degree days. Degree days are often referred to as growing degree days, which refers specifically to plants, or more generally thermal units or heat accumulation. The underlying the concept is the same. It's a metric of the usable heat that a specific plant or insect can utilize for development accumulated over time. So to make this a little bit more clear, let's look at some elements of this definition. First of all, although degree days are derived from temperature, it is a metric or calculation. This isn't a physical property that you can measure with a sensor or look up on your weather station. Usable refers to the range of temperatures that can be actually used by the organism for development. So it's probably not a surprise that when things are really cold, plants and insects tend to shut down and don't develop at all. Similarly, if it's really hot, the rate of development will hit a plateau or could even stop as the organism focuses its energy on staying cool. All of this is species specific. The range of usable temperature can even vary between cultivars. And in the case of insect development, the model parameters for degree days and the rate of growths can even vary according to the host plant. So you get different sets of models for different combinations of pests and hosts. Develop can refer to either a property that varies continuously, like hull volume or shell hardness, or a distage, which is more discrete, like egg versus larva. Both are temperature dependent, but with continuous properties, the change is gradual, whereas with phenology events, a new stage happens very quickly. In both cases, change requires an accumulation of warmth over days or weeks, because it takes the organism's time to produce the sugars and structures and whatever else they need to do for development. When you talk about degree days, you also have to specify a unit of time. In the case of degree days, that's the number of degrees within that golden temperature range within a single day, added up over time. There's also degree hours, which is more common in plant models, which is essentially the same thing except aggregated over hours. So to compute degree days, you need to have a record of how the temperature varies over the course of the day. And you might be lucky to have a temperature record, which is hourly or even minute by minute. However, in practice, we often only have daily minimum and maximum temperatures, particularly with the older data records. So there are several ways that you can model hourly temperature based on a daily minimum and maximum values. You could simply take the average and just assume that was the temperature throughout the whole day. There's more nuanced models that either use triangulation or sine waves, and there's single and double variants of that. Researchers have explored this, and there's different computations. So that's one piece that you'll have to use when you compute degree days to know which model. So you need to know one of these models to actually do this in practice. You're going to need to know that temperature range, an upper and lower threshold for your species of interest, and then you're going to need a source of weather data. Right? So those are the main ingredients to compute degree days. But that by itself is not really very useful, because in order to use this record of accumulated degree days for making a decision about crop management, you also need a plant or pest model to interpret it. So one piece of a plant or pest model will be the biofix, which is simply when you should start counting. This could be a calendar date, such as January 1, or it could be an event when you observe something in your field, such as when you start seeing eggs on your traps, or the trees, half your trees are in bloom, for example. So the model will tell you that. It'll also give you in the case of a phenology model, it'll give you a number of degree days. And again, this isn't temperature and it isn't days, it's a combination of temperature and days that will tell you when different kinds of events are predicted to take place. That could be when you see another generation of insects. It could also be a recommended management action, or when maybe trees will bloom, or something very discrete. Other models are more focused on continuous properties and might look like this, a kind of regression equation where a property such as hull volume varies continuously with based on the degree days, and there's some kind of equation that gives you that continuous curve. All right, so in general, these are the kinds of elements that you'll get in a degree day model. Another example of a weather-driven model is winter chill, because tree crops need a certain amount of chill in order to bloom. Now, this might seem curious, but actually, if this is a evolutionary adaptation that trees have developed over time to know when to start blooming, when to send sap up to the to the branches to produce flowers. If they do it too soon, then they risk getting severe damage from a late frost. And if they do it too late, then they're reducing the amount of growing season that they have to reproduce. So trees have developed an internal mechanism to kind of keep track of how cold it's been. And researchers have also figured out what they're doing and developed models that compute the accumulated chill. So this same model is very useful for planning your crop calendar, like when when the trees are going to bloom, and then from there you can start figuring out other actions to take to manage the orchard crop. These same models can be used with modeled future climate data, because we know temperature is changing and the model's in strong agreement of what that's looking like. So we can use these same kinds of chill models to determine what cultivars are going to be suitable or viable in the coming decades. So that's a quick introduction to weather-driven models. All of this works because plants and insects are cold-blooded and therefore very temperature sensitive to how they develop. This makes them relatively easy to model. And degree days and chill portions are two examples of metrics. These aren't measurements, they're calculations that are derived from measured weather data, such as temperature, that have been invented by researchers to kind of mimic how plants and insects are, their physiology, and help us predict when different things are going to occur. So in the next video, we'll look at how we can turn these models into decision support tools. So we'll see you back here for that one.